Hi, I'm Carol Reynolds, and I am delighted to have the chance to speak with Dr. John Locke, who is a well-known musical figure here in the area with a long career both around North Carolina and the United States and the world, but also here with the Piedmont Wind Symphony. Thank you for meeting with me.
My pleasure. Glad to be here.
Well, you are going to be the man of the hour, the maestro for this upcoming Sousa. I mean, the word concert isn't even enough to say what's going to happen. Could you just tell people a bit, without giving away all the surprises, of what is going to happen when this concert takes place?
Well, sure, I'd be happy to. First of all, I think we're all very fortunate here in central North Carolina in the Piedmont area to have the Piedmont Wind Symphony up and running and in very capable hands of Dr. Mark Norman. It's a wonderful group, talented players, very energetic, enthusiastic bunch of people who were committed to bands and band music, so that makes my job all the easier. A Sousa concert is very different from concerts that one might attend now by an orchestra or by a university band or wind ensemble or wind symphony. And part of the difference is I think that they are considerably more focused on entertainment. And the entertainment aspect was huge for Sousa. He was very much interested in bringing music, great music, to the masses. And for him, he was not at all a snob or a stuffy person, or he did not want to push the envelope on new radical directions for music composition. He was a traditionalist and he was a patriot and he wrote wonderful marches, but his concerts were more like a variety show than just a band concert. There were a lot of moving parts. Of course, there were Sousa marches, a number of them, but generally speaking, very few of the Sousa marches, maybe almost none, other than the Stars and Stripes, which closed every concert. Very few of his marches were printed on the program, on the paper program that was handed out by the ushers. Instead, he used his marches as encores, and almost every piece they did was followed, or many of them were followed immediately by an encore. And so it was quite a bit different. And of course, many of the places he played lots of indoor venues, movie theaters that were transformed into concert halls and the like. But they did a lot of outdoor venues too. Willow Grove near Philadelphia, they performed in the summers many times in a pavilion, in an outdoor pavilion, and gave super successful concerts attended by thousands. It would be normal in his heyday to have seating at that pavilion in Willow Grove for 2,500, sort of under a roof at least, but maybe 30 or 40,000 more people gathered around the pavilion on the lawn, with their dogs and with their picnic baskets and all of that. They just come from the Willow Grove Park, an amusement park, and this was sort of the closing activity, almost like at Walt Disney World when they finished the day with fireworks. Willow Grove finished the day very often in the summer with a Sousa concert. So this was the antithesis of going to hear the New York Philharmonic or going to hear the Philadelphia Orchestra. It was just a whole different thing.
Well, he took music to where the people were. And when you look back on that period, he is one of the reasons that people came to know not just his music, but Beethoven and Wagner arrangements. And I mean, we forget how difficult it was to access music, and he brought it to where people were.
He did, of course, almost his entire career until his last 10 years or so was during a time when if you didn't hear it live, you didn't hear it. I mean, there wasn't that much available on even the early phonograph records and phonograph players, and not that many people had them. So your opportunity to hear music might be your town band, if you were fortunate enough to live in a town that had a band, or a traveling group like the Sousa Band came to your town. It was quite a happening because if you didn't get to hear it live, there wasn't much chance you were going to hear it at all.
Right. His standards too. I mean, we really don't even have a way to cover the kinds of things that he changed for American music for all of us. But setting this rigorous standard seems to be one of the important things he did.
Yes, absolutely. You know, he carved a very wide path in music, for sure. He was truly a pioneer with the traveling professional band, and you talked about the classical music, the music of Beethoven or Wagner or Tchaikovsky, for example. Oddly enough, what he often did with his band arrangements and with the arrangements of others that he performed with the Sousa Band, they would play the music of Tchaikovsky, but they wouldn't play the whole thing. Literally, and this seems always sort of funny to me, they would leave out the boring parts. They would leave out the slow, dramatic, very slow build part, and they go right to the part that people wanted to hear. And for example, in the William Tell Overture, it has quite a long, slow opening with an English horn solo. They wouldn't play that. They go right to or literally right to what in our generation became known as the Lone Ranger theme, and they would play that, and the people would just go wild because that's what they wanted to hear. So he gave them what they wanted to hear. He played the classics, but he took the snobbery out of it and made it a piece that he loved the parts of pieces that would become toe tappers, and he really liked to get people excited by playing music that they were just couldn't sit there without tapping their foot and tapping their toe to it.
And that's still true. You cannot listen to this music and be still inside. And is that one of the reason that you were attracted to it? And as I understand it, you've done a lot of Sousa concerts at UNCG and in other venues across your career. Has that been part of your mission?
Yes, you know, as a kid growing up, I had one brother who was 6 years older than I, and he played trombone, and was in the school band before I was, of course, and played in the all-county band and the all-state band. And I went to his concerts, and my brother and my dad, who had played trumpet many years prior to my time, they both liked music. They liked band music. They liked marches. And so we had some recordings of marches. We had a reel-to-reel tape recorder and a tape that was all Sousa marches. And we played that and just absolutely wore the tape out. I loved those tunes. And once I started playing trombone in fourth grade, I would kind of fake along on my trombone to try and somehow come up with a tune and put my slide in the right position so I could play along to the extent that I could in fourth grade or fifth grade. But I always loved those pieces. They just absolutely, totally spoke to me. And when the military bands, the Army band, the Navy band, the Marine band would come, I grew up in Charleston, West Virginia. And when those groups would come through town, we would always go to their concerts. And I always loved the marches, and I loved the trumpet solos and the cornet solos. And I just loved everything about a band. And I mean, I grew up with that, and it always touched me. Now, UNCG, the stroke of luck I had there was when I first decided I wanted to do a tribute to Sousa concert. It was 1989. I came there in 1982, so I'd been there 6 or 7 years, and I planned to do this concert. And I knew that there was a gentleman who lived in Columbus, Ohio, who was Sousa's biographer. His name's Paul Byerly, and he's written 3 or 4 books about John Philip Sousa, and they're all wonderful. They're all wonderful books. And so I got and there was a person on the UNCG faculty, a music ed professor at that time, who was a friend of Paul Byerly's and had done some work for him when she was a student at Ohio State, partly about cataloging Sousa's entire life and where he was literally every day of his professional life. It was an amazing project. And so she put me in touch with Paul Byerly. And I said, well, Paul, I want to do this concert. And he said, "Oh, that's great. That'll be wonderful." And I said, "Well, I want to know something. Did the Sousa Band," and I didn't know at the time, did the Sousa Band ever perform in Greensboro, North Carolina? I said, "Yes, they did. Give me until tomorrow and I'll call you back." And so I said, "All right." So he had my number, and sure enough, the next day he called, and this is how thorough he was. He in this log of all the performances of the Sousa Band, he looked it up and he said, "John, they played there 6 times." And he just rattled them off: 1902, 1910, 1914. And he just went and he told me where they played. And most of the performances, the first 5 of those 6, were in theaters downtown in Greensboro. The National Theater, which is no longer there, long since torn down, was a place where they played, I think, all 5 of those others. And then here was the jackpot. The 6th performance, 1930, Sousa was 76 years old. November 13th, 1930, they played in the North Carolina College for Women Auditorium, which during my time was called the Aycock Auditorium. Now it's back to being called the UNCG Auditorium. And so I thought, wow, are you kidding me? Sousa played in our auditorium in 1930. And the auditorium was only about 3 years old, and Sousa was 76. And so I went to the newspaper and went through the microfilms, and sure enough, there were ads for him coming to town, and there was a review of the concert. Now, here's the irony. By 1930, Sousa only lived another year and a half. He died in 1932. And in 1930, the band was on the decline. It had just, I wouldn't say worn out its welcome, but part of the problem was by 1930, we were in the Depression, number one. And one thing that Sousa feared, and he did very few recordings with the Sousa Band because he always thought that, if I record my pieces and then people can purchase them and play them on their phonograph, they're not going to pay to come hear my band live. He was literally afraid of the technology, afraid of recordings putting his touring band out of business. And so certainly they had declined through the latter part of the 1920s. And so 1930, when they played in the auditorium at Women's College, they only played to half a house, which was sort of unheard of. Now, this is a gigantic auditorium. In those days, it seated 2,300 people. But there was a decline to the point. Often, when they'd come to Greensboro and play in that movie theater, the National Theater, they'd almost always do 2 shows a day, sometimes 3. And I expect it held maybe 900 or 1,000 people, but they'd sell it out 2 or 3 times a day and maybe stay a couple days. So, but that was I always thought, well, this is like divine intervention. Here I am at a place that has this wonderful auditorium, and the Sousa Band played right on this stage. So it was just, to me, it was just like, wow, we had to exploit that every way we could just to get people excited about it, and it certainly had me excited. So, the irony is that let me one more thing. The irony about this story is that the very first year in 1989, we filled the place and turned people away, and I thought, okay, 59 years went by since Sousa himself was here, and somehow, of course, Greensboro had about, more than quadrupled in size. I think it was a 10-fold increase from 1930 to 1989 in population. But I thought, well, how about that? my imitation Sousa Band outdrew the real thing on the same stage. I thought that was pretty hilarious.
Oh, that's great. And it's kind of vindication. And the fact that he is still, if anything, in some ways, I mean, he's around the world. Everybody knows the name. And of course, he was huge in his time. But wouldn't he be surprised, don't you think, to see how electric his music is to this day, even with all the things he rightfully feared, recordings, which would, and the jazz era and the dancing and all the things that took people away from concerts. But nonetheless, this is magical stuff. And it's still as vital in a completely different world I mean, I just think you have to wonder what he would say if he could walk in. And isn't there going to be in this concert sort of a bit of recreation? Can I say that much about the atmosphere that's going to be done with the Piedmont Wind Symphony with you at the helm?
Yes, yes. You know, the thing about this of a Sousa concert is that they were literally nonstop. I don't know how the players survived because they would be, the minute a piece was over, he would turn around and bow, and as he turned back to the band, his hand was up, and boom, there was the march encore. And oftentimes that they might have had a list of what was coming, and maybe he would change it. He would turn around and say El Cap, which meant El Capitan, and bam, they played those marches so many times, almost no one in the band needed the music. They all had the standard march rep memorized, but then they'd play that and then immediately to the next and so forth. One thing we do to slow things down to make it a little more palatable for the instrumentalists, so they don't just pass out halfway through the first half, is that we slow things down a little bit with a master of ceremonies who makes some announcements and gives a little context about what's coming and introduces a soloist and that sort of thing. So, but it's the other thing. When I did the first concert in 1989, Paul Byerly, the biographer, came to Greensboro. In fact, he came in 1989 and he came back in 1991, and he brought box loads of books of his Sousa book that we sold for him in the lobby of the auditorium. But he came to my dress rehearsals, and he was all over me about the concerts being too slow. I thought somehow, I mean, I just didn't know, but he really took me to task and schooled me on how this is supposed to work. And I would play something, and I'd turn around in the rehearsal and take my bow and turn around, and then people would be shuffling music, and a percussionist would be switching, and we'd take maybe, I don't know, 20 seconds or something before we'd start the next tune. He'd say, he would just be up. He'd just be yelling at me at the top of his lungs, "No, you don't understand. When you turn around, bam, the piece has to start. The march encore is just like that. There's no time. There's just no time for anything, or it's not the least bit authentic." And so that was one of the things. And then the other thing he taught me that I don't know where I could have possibly gotten this education without him, was that what we'll do with the Piedmont, one thing we're going to do with the Piedmont Wind Symphony is, after intermission, there's a segment of the program that we call, and Sousa called, showing off before company. And it's kind of an unusual thing that you never see at any other kind of concert. And it's unconducted. Mr. Sousa would be off stage, and the band would sort of spontaneously perform little pieces, and often with the Sousa Band, the saxophones, some of the clarinet players would drop their clarinets and go pick up an extra sax, and they'd have a saxophone ensemble of 7 or 8 or 9 players, and they would come to the edge of the stage often, and they'd just start playing. They'd play almost like vaudeville kind of saxophone pieces that were popular in the teens and the 20s. Very technical, but sort of like very humorous kinds of pieces. And then the clarinets might play something, and the trumpet section would play something, and the percussion would do a little something. And that would go on. Sometimes it started during intermission, in fact, with the Sousa Band, this showing off before company. And they would pass the music around the band. Little impromptu groups would pop up, and sometimes even a soloist would stand up and play something on trumpet or trombone, a little some passage or some little piece of a solo. And it was called showing off before company. And then often they'd segue right into a march, and Sousa's still off stage. And so it's like a whole thing. It's like just a kind of a spontaneous, odd, wonderful, humorous time in the program. And so we'll do something akin to that, I think, with Piedmont Winds.
That's fun. That's just, there's so many reasons why people are going to want to be at this show. And the variety of types of music. Again, the marches are huge, but he wrote so much more. He
Yeah,
started as a violinist. I mean, he
that's
could have
right.
easily gone in that route as a classical violinist, the kind of breadth and tradition and energy, and then the showmanship. There, you can't really imagine all that in one person without any of the aids of, as you say, the media, the way it is now. I mean, he just got out there and put those people on the train, and they did it, right? And
That's right.
it's a stunning part of our American cultural heritage, and it happens to be great, great fun. Now, I'm going to ask you again. I could ask you 50 questions, but I'd like to ask one more, and I've sort of alluded to it. Will there be music other than? I mean, you mentioned the performing before the company, but will there be other Sousa pieces that are not necessarily marches?
Yeah, there sure will. He wrote 137 marches. For the longest time, we thought he'd written 136, and then one more was discovered. But he also wrote novelty pieces. He wrote waltzes. He wrote overtures. He wrote a number of other kinds of pieces, and he did a lot of arranging. He arranged a lot of pieces too that he wanted to play that other composers had written. And yes, we've got. He wrote a piece called the Looking Upward Suite, and it has to do with looking at the stars and the sun and the moon and all that. And the piece we're going to do one of the movements from Looking Upward. It's called By the Light of the Polar Star. And it's a delightful piece. Sort of begins with kind of a mysterioso little tune in the woodwinds, and then it almost goes into a very happy, joyous. It doesn't sound like a march, but it sounds like it's a toe tapper, and there's sleigh bells jingling. So it's it's kind of celestial in its origins, and it's also just very delightful. And we have another piece that isn't a march. It almost sounds like John Philip Sousa is channeling Scott Joplin. It sounds very much ragtime. It sounds like a rag, and it's called Easter Monday on the White House Lawn. And as you know, as you probably know, a tradition that began, I think, in the 1870s in Washington, D.C. at the White House. Can't remember who was president in the 1870s when this happened, but there was a tradition that on the Monday after Easter, the White House would invite the president, and the people of the White House would invite children to come to the White House lawn, and they had Easter eggs. They had some kind of thing with Easter eggs and spoons that they'd roll the Easter eggs across. It wasn't like an Easter egg hunt, but it was like rolling Easter eggs across the White House lawn. And so Sousa, who born and raised in Washington, D.C., wrote this piece in honor of that. And it sounds for all the world like you're listening to a Scott Joplin rag.
That's great. Well, this concert is going to delight people in every way. It's going to fulfill what you expect from a Sousa march. It's going to broaden your ear, all of our ears, in ways that we might not know about Sousa. And it's a really important link to the heritage of Sousa in this area through you, who are really linked into this music, and certainly one of the great specialists in the world on John Philip Sousa. And what you know about it, it's really a masterful gift that you're bringing to our audiences. So I just look forward to it. I hope everybody and everybody else gets here and comes early maybe, and comes in a festive. Go ahead and dress up. Hey, bring out something from great grandma's attic and bring a picnic. Well, I guess we can't really bring picnic baskets, can we? Or maybe before. Who knows, right?
Right.
And just almost anything will go in this wonderful event that's coming up very soon. So I just want to thank you for making time to talk about it and tell me more about how John Philip Sousa has influenced you and this area and really music at large.
My pleasure. Great to be with you.
Thank you, and wait until that music starts. Thank you, sir.
Okay.